All right. So, if you've come in just for this session, which I don't think anyone has, but welcome to the second Canadian Homebrewing Summit. I am Kathy Yenli, president of the Canadian Homebrewers Association. So just a bit of housekeeping before we begin. So there should be a little presenter's screen. Tyler's screen should be open. You can minimize it if you do want to wander around and find some friends to talk to, but you can have it so it does take over your screen. We do have a Q&A portion at the very end. If you have any questions, just save them to the very end. There is a podium off to the right side of this room with a little circle in there. You can go there and ask your questions. It will be broadcasted to the whole room so everyone can hear. So this session is sponsored by Escarpment Labs. So the door prize for this session is 5 yeast pouches with free shipping from Escarpment Labs. This is a good one to be in. And if you miss out, that's fine. Escarpment Labs does offer Canada-wide flat rate shipping to homebrew wholesalers. So if you do miss out on this fancy door prize, definitely reach out to your local homebrew store to get a Escarpment Lab yeast order. So without further ado, please welcome Tyler.
Can you guys hear me okay? Working perfect. Okay, so I am doing my presentation on the iSpindel, and I'll get to what the heck an iSpindel is in a second. First, a little about myself. Tyler, last name's Ustrzycki, although I don't blame Kathy for not even wanting to try and pronounce that. Husband and father to 2 tiny kids. I've been homebrewing since 2015, but I really didn't get into it really dive into it until probably about 2019. I got my provisional BJCP, but because of the pandemic, I haven't been able to find a tasting exam to get recognized yet. So hopefully soon. And my day job is kind of along the lines of an iSpindel. I'm an electronics designer at Tesla, so I do the circuit card design for the infotainment and autopilot systems in the car. And if you want to find me on Instagram, Grindstone Brew is my handle. So what is an iSpindel and why it's kind of awesome? An iSpindel is a do-it-yourself digital hydrometer and temperature sensor. It's Wi-Fi enabled Internet of Things device that you put right into your wort as it's fermenting. It has an accelerometer and a temperature sensor. And as your beer ferments, it'll send your gravity and your temperature to the cloud, and then you can get it right on your device. The easiest integration, I think, is right on Brewfather, so you can see what's happening in your fermenter. If it's a closed bucket or a stainless steel bucket and you don't quite know what's going on, this is a really good way of seeing it. Why I like it a lot is it's super low cost. It's DIY, which for me, that's my favorite part of homebrewing is doing it all yourself and coming up with your own crazy inventions to make your beers better. It's also open source, so there's a huge community out there who have the exact same problems with this thing as you do. And it integrates with lots of different devices online. Brewfather is a good example. How it works. I won't go into all of the equations because that would be extremely boring, but I'll just say science is the reason it works. As your beer ferments, the actual angle of the iSpindel will change relative to the sugar density in the water, so it'll tilt from side to side. So every X amount of minutes that you set, the sensor will read that angle and the temperature and the battery voltage and send that over your Wi-Fi to the cloud. And then you can pull it down whenever you want to see what's going on in your fermentation. So the hardware, that's kind of all the pieces that are involved in it. It's like a GPS PET tube, which is like a preformed pop bottle. a small printed circuit board. There's a couple different ones out there. The brains is that D1 mini device. It has a battery and a holder, a temperature sensor, which is this DS18B20. The gyroscope is right beside it. And then the charger for the battery, and then some other small things like a switch and a couple of resistors and some headers just to mount it onto the board. There's not much to it. Once assembled, all of those fit right inside that PET tube. You crank on the lid, and it is this nice little floating hydrometer for you. So here's my messy workbench of it actually getting soldered up. Soldering it is really easy, and I wouldn't be intimidated by it. I do have some background in soldering, but even if I didn't, I would probably consider it as a pretty basic project. It's all through-hole parts. It makes it really easy to solder. I think you could probably watch a couple YouTube videos on how to solder and be able to tackle this project. And that's what it looks like when it's all assembled. The backside with the battery and the charger, and then the front side, the brains, that D1 chip on the right, and then the gyro and the temperature sensor on the left. So assembling this doesn't take too long. Even with no experience, you could probably do it in maybe an hour. It's pretty straightforward. You'll probably screw up a couple times, but that's kind of the fun in homebrewing. Who of us haven't screwed up a couple times in homebrewing? So once it's all assembled, you need to put the firmware or the software on the device. So this is the first part. Is I had some experience with firmware. I really hate that type of stuff, and this was really easy. So I think I built this thing, and then it sat on my shelf for about a month because I was just intimidated by the whole firmware software side of things. And then it ended up taking me about 5 minutes. It's really easy. You download the firmware, you plug in your iSpindel just into your computer, and then you flash it, and it's literally about 3 or 4 clicks. I left the link below. And there's also, like I said, it's open source, so there's a ton of video tutorials out there. And it wasn't near as intimidating as I thought it was. Software. So once this thing is loaded, you have to do an initial configuration of it, in which you press the button on the side really, really rapidly, and then it'll start flashing, and you'll see it come up into a configuration mode. And from there, you'll see it as its own Wi-Fi ID, so you can connect to it that way for the initial first-time setup. Something we did learn, though, is that Apple devices really hate the iSpindel, and they really don't want to connect to it. They'll connect to it for a moment and then drop off really quick. So a Windows machine is best, and some people got some Android machines working with it as well. This was probably the most frustrating for people to actually connect for that first time. But once it's set up on their home Wi-Fi and they calibrate it, it was running pretty seamlessly. So that's the next step. Once you connect to it, you'll see a nice web page show up with a bunch of configuration options for it. So here's where you can set your own home Wi-Fi, your Wi-Fi password, whatever you want to call your iSpindel. This is where you would enter the information to connect to, say, Brewfather or any other service you want to use. It also tests how this thing's working. So you can see the tilt or the angle of your iSpindel from there, whatever temperature it's reading, and then it'll do its own conversion to get the gravity of whatever wort it's in. You can also do the first-time calibration just to kind of zero the iSpindel of where it needs to get to. Calibration. This was probably the most frustrating and tedious part of the whole thing. So once you build it, you need to calibrate it to read the specific gravities. So this was quite time consuming because you're essentially making a wort out of just sugar and water. So you would start with just pure water, distilled water. You get your 1.00 reading, and then you mark that whatever angle it says it is. And then you add sugar and build this gravity up all the way up to what you think your biggest beer would be. And then you would go to the online tool, which the link there is below. Type in all the values you have, and it'll come up with a formula. And you would put that formula into your configuration, and it's now calibrated. So this would last. I've only had to do this originally, and I've been using the iSpindel for a couple of years now, and it still gives me pretty accurate gravity readings. Now I did my calibration just with water. You want to do a really good calibration, and you can measure your gravity throughout, like take samples off your wort. You can do a proper fermentation and read whatever angle it says there to get something a little more accurate. So here's a picture of my first two iSpindels kind of floating in some sugar water and sending their angles during the calibration stage. And yeah, that is how you configure it in a nutshell. To go into what my experiences have been with it, I've been using two of them since March of last year. It was kind of my first COVID project. So they've had at least a dozen batches now. I did lose one earlier this year. Some wort got inside, and I didn't realize, and I left it there. And by the time fermentation was done, I took it out, and it was all rusted and corroded and not working anymore. Getting it up and running was more of a mental hurdle. I think it took having some extra time during COVID to actually be like, hey, I'm going to finally do this project. And once it was done, I'm quite happy with the results. The initial calibration, as I said, was probably the most tedious. If you get two or three, do it all at once, because then you don't have to make that sugar water mixture. And the integration with Brewfather, I think, was the best. If you do use that software, seeing your wort fermenting along is really nice. It's really good to know when fermentation's about done. If you're doing a lager, to crank up the temperature for a de-rest, or when to add dry hops, or just when your beer is done and it's just sitting there. Originally, I didn't have my temperature sensor working, and I just kind of sat on that, and I couldn't figure it out for the longest time, but I'll get to that in a couple slides. I did finally solve it. Actually, another member of the HOZERs group solved it for me. I did need to do a quick calibration, just resetting it to 0 after about 4 months. It was drifting a little off. I think one of my favorite things about this is the battery and Wi-Fi are quite good. There's other ones on the market, commercial examples that use Bluetooth. And Bluetooth doesn't work very well with like a stainless steel conical, whereas Wi-Fi, although it does get diminished by the stainless steel, it's strong enough to penetrate the metal, and the battery does last at least 3 weeks, and then you just pop off the cap, recharge it with the USB, and then you're good to go for your next batch. So yeah, the commercial comparison with the iSpindel, I think the one that's most popular would be the Tilt Hydrometer. They're very similar. They work on the similar concepts. The Tilt costs a little shy of about $200. However, it is ready to go out of the box, and it uses Bluetooth as opposed to Wi-Fi. So a lot of people, you do need to have another device communicating with it close by. So a lot of people take an old cell phone to leave next to it. But with this one, you don't really need that as long as Wi-Fi is within range. You don't have to do that. The battery life on the Tilt is much better, but unless you're fermenting for 3 months, I don't think you would need to, you need that much of the battery life. And the tilt hydrometer is not a rechargeable battery, so you got to replace it. What drew me to the iSpindel the most was the Wi-Fi, and then I kind of wanted to build it myself and not spend $200. There's lots of other DIY solutions that are very similar out there too. But yeah, the community is not as big as iSpindel for support and stuff like that. Yeah, so the FAQs, kind of the common questions I get or have gotten about this is, can you ferment under pressure? Yes, I tried it. It didn't crack. These PET containers are rated for at least the pressure that you would use, that you would be fermenting under. Just make sure the lid is tight, because if stuff does seep in, then you're gonna scrap the iSpindel. And just another thing to note, when I was fermenting under pressure, I noticed that the readings were off by a couple gravity points. I think that was probably due to the carbonation of the beer just kind of pressing on the little bubbles getting attached to the iSpindel and affecting the tilt just slightly. The stainless steel fermentation vessels, do they work within it? I haven't had any issues. I have one in a brew bucket in my garage right now, fermenting with the door shut, and I'm still getting readings from it. It only sends a reading once every 15 minutes, so it's not like you're watching a video and you need constant Wi-Fi connectivity. It just kind of powers up, sends that little bit of data, and then powers down again, and it does work. However, on those tilt ones, I've heard some bad reviews, or you need to put a repeater close by if you have a stainless steel bucket. One question I got was, can large amounts of krausen throw it off? So yes, I have had that happen where because the krausen is so high, when it starts to die down again, there's like chunks of yeast on the top of it, and that will definitely weigh it down and mess with your values. But it's only rare. It's happened to me twice so far. And probably the most important question I get is, will it fit into a standard carboy? No, it won't. So if you're using a brew bucket or a wide mouth carboy, then you're all good. But those standard 6-gallon glass carboys, it's too wide to fit through the neck of that. So I did my first two probably in March 2020. And then I gave a presentation similar to this to the HOZER group and drummed up quite a bit of interest. And then we put it out to True Grist as well to maybe buy a bunch of these, do a bulk buy similar to your grain or hot bulk buy, and get them all at a cheaper price. We expected, maybe we'll get about 25 people will be interested. We can solder up about 25 of these, no big deal. Split it if we need to. It kind of went nuts, and we had 121 iSpindels ordered. So there's 121 iSpindels between Hamilton and Kitchener and Waterloo, kind of out there in the wild fermenting right now. We needed a small army to help us solder all of these, but it's cool because homebrewers are super resourceful. There was a ton of people with soldering experience that could help out, and we did get them all done. And one of the best parts is because we were buying so many of these, we ordered all the parts in bulk and got it down to about $23 each. And the most expensive part of that was the actual lithium battery itself. Lessons learned. If you're interested in doing a bulk buy with your club, I would definitely recommend it. It's a fun way to get chatting about a DIY project with beer involved, but not necessarily beer itself. It was really cool because homebrewers were super smart and awesome people I learned a ton just from the communal knowledge that was out there. Homebrewers are doing some really wacky things with these, like skimming off data, setting up their own proxy servers, all this crazy stuff. One thing I would recommend, though, if you are doing a bulk buy, is to order, there's a surface mount version with surface mount parts. I would suggest ordering that one and saving yourself some soldering. It's a couple dollars more expensive, and I should have listened to Justin from TrueGrist and done it that way, as it would have saved us a bunch of time. I would also say order more parts than you think. We ordered about 10% extra, and us and Hamilton had to buy some extra temp sensors, and TrueGrist had to buy some extra gyros. And then the thing I mentioned earlier is Apple doesn't like iSpindles. So if you're using your iPhone or something to try to connect to it, it might be difficult. I know a couple of people had some real issues connecting because they were using Apple devices. But once they switched, they did get it connected. Another lesson learned, the temperature sensor failure. So as I mentioned, I couldn't figure out for the longest time why I wasn't getting a temperature reading. Another hoser, Chris Saunders, did manage to figure this out for me. However, it did cost him his iSpindel because it kind of blew up the trace. But essentially, when you can see the probes of the temperature sensor in the right picture, we're actually poking through to the other side. When you clip the battery in, it's okay, but when you kind of jam it into this tube, it'll actually pierce the covering on the battery and short out your temperature sensors. So my temperature sensor was shorted for a year. I didn't really notice it. Chris's, on the other hand, it actually folded over and made contact with the 3-volt supply and blew the whole trace. So he did lose one iSpindel finding this little bug. And another thing, we didn't have to go through this, but one of the other members of TrueGrist did find a little gotcha. There is a diode on the little computer chip off to the side. And if you were to plug it in using the USB from that computer chip, as opposed to the charging USB on the right-hand side, you would put 5-volt into that battery, and that over time would actually explode that battery. But as long as your switch is off and you're not plugging into the USB on the left side, you should be fine. When it's in the sleeve, there's only one USB facing out, so you're always gonna plug into that one anyways. None of us had their batteries explode, but just a word of warning if you're gonna build this yourself. How to get these? Aside from doing a bulk buy, probably one of the easiest places to do it, there's a website called brewthings.com. I believe it's owned by a Canadian guy, although I've never actually met him. He sells them for about $35, but without the battery, and then you got to buy the battery. So it probably comes to about $50. They're all over eBay. If you want to go on there, there's a bunch of different prices. People are selling them all over the place. Or you could gather all the pieces yourself. I put a link to the shopping list below. And then you can just gather all the pieces, build it yourself. Probably be a little cheaper. Or do the bulk buy if you can organize it through your club, and then it gets really cheap. Some links in case you're interested. There is an iSpindel website. It was originally in German and it's been translated to English, so the translation's pretty good. But there's also a huge community out there. There's a YouTube channel by this open source distilling guy. He takes you through things quite detailed, but he has a goofy costume, so you got to put up with that. And other than that, I will take any questions. I was hoping to get a lot of questions with this because I didn't think I was going to come close to filling up the full hour. So any questions about this?
If anyone has any questions, this is kind of where you want to come and ask them.
Stop sharing the screen.
Hi. So great presentation. Super informative. I was very much looking forward to this one because Sean has built his own a couple times too. But the links that you provided, are you able to put those in an email for us?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And when you say that buy in bulk, like so, your group there, is it called HOZERs?
Yeah, HOZERs. Yeah.
Like it. Do you guys make them for other people? Like, do you sell them, or was it just like a group project that you did?
This was just like a group project that we did. So when I say buy in bulk, we just ordered the parts. We ordered a bunch of PCBs, a bunch of batteries, and just because we were buying so many, it lowered the price quite a bit.
Yeah.
Like if you buy one resistor, it's going to cost you a couple bucks, but if you order 100, it's going to be a couple cents. So
yeah. No, that's cool. Because I'm definitely interested in getting them, but I use the glass carboys.
Oh yeah,
yeah. So I mean, I do have for Monsters and SS Brewtex, but I usually just keep those for beer or like literally just hooch made out of juice. But yeah, I'd really like to give it a try and figure out how the mead that I do ferments. But yeah, that was really informative. Thank you.
Cool, thanks.
So I actually use something like that pre-tilt. I think I bought something at HomebrewCon, and it was, you put it on the top of the carboy, and it dangled like a little like thing that floated in the carboy. Is it possible to do something like that for glass carboys, you think?
I believe Play-Doh is a company that sells something similar. I don't think it's like it works on a different concept than the angle, but it essentially measures your bubbles, and then from the bubbles you can figure out your gravity that way. I haven't actually tried them. I've just seen them online.
That's fair. Yeah, I can't even remember what the name of it was. I bought it a few years ago, and it was on Bluetooth, and I was fermenting out of a keg, and I just couldn't get any data unless my phone was right on top of like the keg opening. And so I just never used it again. And then 2 years ago, I was like, oh, maybe I'll dig it out and use it again. And you have to use the app, and like the company's gone. So like I couldn't use it at all.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the problems with the companies. If they do go under, they have their own cloud services, and you just can't get at them again.
Totally.
Any other questions? There's a little under time, I guess.
That's okay. Any more questions, comments? Does anyone else use like something like the iSpindel?
There's quite a few around there in Southern Ontario now that we know, but I'm not sure. I know a lot of people have gotten things really working well. They have their own servers set up to record and log all this data. And then I think a lot of people also have $20 paperweights there. When I reach out to them, they're like, yeah, I'm definitely going to get to this. I just haven't yet. So. Oh, I can't hear you, Sean.
There we go. Yeah, I've built a couple of them. Luckily, I didn't have the problem with the iPhone. Connected fine, but I did find I had issues because I've got a SS Brewtech stainless steel bucket. I had to build a Wi-Fi repeater for mine, and for whatever reason, the tilt, because I do have a tilt, that was the first thing I bought, and then after paying the duty charge and everything, it came up north of 200. Yeah, that was before you can actively get them here in Canada. So I decided that I'm not doing that again. And being a guy who's into electronics, I started Googling and found this. But for whatever reason, I found that I started having problems later on with Bluetooth through stainless steel as well. But same thing with Wi-Fi. And you mentioned you have yours in the garage in a chamber, and your Wi-Fi is a-okay.
Yeah, I have like a mesh system around my house, so I got pretty good reception in the garage, and I haven't had any issues.
Yeah, I've got a mesh system set up. I had to put a repeater, but when I was doing the calibration, making the sugar water solution, I found that it just being in the pot was giving me signal issues. And one of the nodes for my wireless repeaters is just like maybe 20 feet away from that. So yeah, well, actually, sorry, it wasn't connecting to the Wi-Fi repeater. I was connecting directly to it, but I had to bring my phone right next to where the pot was. Otherwise, the reception would fade in and out.
It could always be because like it's an open source standard thing. Your Wi-Fi chip or the version of your D1 kind of brain in there, maybe an older version, maybe the antenna's better, something like that.
Yeah, my version of the D1s. This is also something maybe to keep an eye out. So where the USB port is located, it's actually, if you watch the open source distilling guy, his is on the top of the board. Mine is actually on the bottom. So when I put the D1 Mini, I wasn't thinking, I just pushed it flat up against the PCB, pretty much flat up against it. And when I went to plug in the USB cable, the shroud around the USB cable, like, you physically couldn't do it. And there was no way I was desoldering that chip once I put it on there. So I had to order a special USB cable and then file that down. So if you're ordering parts, see if you can get a visual on where that USB port, the data port side is located, on the top or bottom.
Definitely. That's the fun of building these things. Yeah, there's always one like gotcha moment.
Yeah. But I'm glad to see that there's a lot of people building them, and I love the idea of doing a bulk buy. So maybe we'll see if there's enough interest in our club.
Any more questions or comments? No? Oh, Steph.
Of course, I'm back. So you said it won't, like, I'm now determined to figure out how to put these in glass carboys. Is there a way to just possibly make it thinner? Like, I don't know anything about electronics. This is why I'm asking this question. I don't know anything. So is there a way to make it thinner, maybe longer, maybe make the board longer so it's like maybe this big instead of this big?
Yes. So you can always like, the good thing about it being open source is as long as you have the brain of this thing, the software is always going to be available to you. So you could definitely design your own PCB, and probably the battery is kind of the limiting factor. So if you went with a smaller battery, you could definitely slim it down to fit into a carboy opening. Or
it looks like it's so close to fitting, like the size.
It is. It's not that far. You probably wouldn't need to scale it down that much.
A couple millimeters, maybe, right?
Yeah, it could be. You could always find a different canister. These were just like the standard sizes. So if you look at like, they're used for geocaching.
Okay, yeah.
I'm sure if you look at different geocaching containers, you can.
So waterproof sort of sealing, yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
I guess if you were to attach a string, like fishing line, to the top of it or something, you could pull it out. Because fishing line wouldn't pull any bacteria in, would it? Like not like cotton string?
I think if you had fishing line attached to it, what you'd have to be careful of is that like the weight of the fishing line or the tension of the fishing line wouldn't affect the actual tilt of the thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of the fun of this, is to try and figure out a way for it to work with your setup exactly.
Okay. Well, Sean, I'm going to be reaching out to you shortly because I don't know how to do any of this. Okay, thanks for answering that.
Any more questions or comments? No? Well, thank you very much, Tyler, for that great presentation on iSpindles. I'm sure lots of people are now have their gears going in their mind as to how they're going to get this going for themselves or their club. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.